today's episode, quarterbacks. We are now transitioning to position by position breakdowns. We have quarterback tiers, flag plants, and fades. It's a great episode. We're going to break down some of my custom tiers that we've already made, go through some of the reasoning of why tiers are great, and then each one of us is going to kind of give our priority targets or flag plants, and then we're going to tell you some of the guys that we are avoiding pretty much at all costs in fantasy drafts. Keegan. Okay, why tiers, right? Tiers allow you to spot value at ADP. So, for example, I have Daniel Jones in the same tier as Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott, because I think at the end of the season, they will roughly score the same amount of points. However, ADP isn't reflective of this. Daniel Jones is going almost 30 picks after Deshaun Watson is. A tiered-based strategy allows me to properly understand opportunity costs. I can wait almost 3 rounds to grab Daniel Jones and also draft high-value targets at other positions instead of taking Watson. This is why tiers are critical on draft day.
I think it helps you, especially when you start weighing in different positions. It's like, do I want the last, player in this QB tier versus, the wide receiver in this tier? So it's kind of opportunity costs with different pools and kind of where you rank them in different buckets. So I think it definitely helps simplify things instead of just being like, okay, here's the next quarterback versus the next wide receiver. It's kind of where do you have them relative to their position and some of those kind of different levels of those positions.
Agreed. Honestly, it can really help make or break a decision too. Like if you're going through specifically for best ball drafts right now, when I'm looking at the tiers that I have for QB1s and the elite guys that are going so fast, like I can plan ahead and adjust to like where QBs are going in the draft, knowing like where I'm at in the tier of quarterbacks. If I see Allen, Mahomes, Hurts go early, I know that I probably have one last shot because I consider Lamar Jackson kind of in that same tier. I know I have one last shot, and then after that, I'll move on to the next and like recoup some value at different positions until the next tier of quarterback run starts happening. But when you have it based on like a couple guys in each tier each time, it's a little bit easier for me to like understand a draft board and like kind of predict where I want to go next too.
I think that's well said. I think quarterbacks in particular are such an important position to understand tiers because it seems like every single season we have somebody in that like third or fourth tier that's jumping up into the second or first tier. There's a lot of movement. We have our heavyweights. I think, and when I broke this down, guys, and feel free, I'm going to share some of my QB tiers here. If you object to any of them, let me know. Give me your feedback. I'd love to hear your breakdown here. But I broken up the quarterbacks into 7 tiers, right? So tier 1, I have it labeled expensive but worth it. This is your Jalen Hurts, your Patrick Mahomes, your Josh Allen. These are the guys that are going off the board in the second and third round right now on Underdog. There's not much to say about these guys. They all averaged over 25 fantasy points a game last season. If you had one of them, you were in the playoffs last year. If you had Jalen Hurts, you were probably going to win your league. Jalen Hurts was the only guy in this tier that wasn't a top quarterback selected last year. He was a 6th-round draft pick. These are guys you draft in the second or third round and expect them to continue their dominance, right? You're giving up an opportunity to maybe draft a second running back, a second wide receiver, and you're going all in at quarterback. Considering that ADPs at quarterback's been pushed up this season, do you think that this tier is still worth investing in at cost?
I do personally. It's like you said, you're going to be investing second or third rounder depending on what type of league you're in and what type of scoring you're looking at. But like you said, having a quarterback that's consistently putting up 20, 25 points a game gives you such a leg up over your opponent. You can gamble on some of the quarterbacks in the later tiers, which we're going to get into. But a lot of times it's worth it just to have that sure thing Mahomes or Jalen Hurts giving you 25 over your second wide receiver or your second running back. So it really just depends on how you go about your roster construction. But I think typically, assuming these guys are healthy, the payoff is definitely worth it. You just have to be okay with that risk factor and not getting some of those higher end flex players in those same spots.
Yeah, I'm kind of all in on the elite quarterback thing. I just don't want to deal with positional disadvantages when I go into a weekly matchup. I don't want to go up against Patrick Mahomes in fantasy. Like, I don't want to show up on Sunday and look at my opponent's roster and see he's got Josh Allen and I'm starting, Derek Carr. Like, it's the last thing I want, to be at a disadvantage that hard on a points per game basis in fantasy. So I'm always willing to pay up to have an elite quarterback on my roster.
What's interesting this year, though, is the second tier that I have it labeled could easily be QB1 if things break right. and I have Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. And Justin Fields last season broke the slate for 10 weeks. He was the number one player in fantasy after he was unleashed on the ground. Joe Burrow routinely has these monster 40-plus point games. And Lamar Jackson has been MVP of this league and has had the greatest modern quarterback season I can remember in terms of fantasy football. So you have these three challengers that sit here. They go in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, typically on underdog. They have the upside that the top three have, but maybe not that specific rushing floor or Patrick Mahomes' magical fairy dust that he has floor that they have built out. But I'm looking at this tier, and I think this is more of an attractive place to select quarterbacks this year because of the opportunity cost. You're taking these guys in the 4th round, so you're able to draft a running back, 2 wide receivers, go quarterback here. I think it allows more for a high-impact build that has more ceiling plays.
If there was anyone here that would have made sense to be in that maybe top tier that isn't in there, I would probably pick Burrow, but just curious what went into your thought process in terms of putting Joe Burrow with 2 quarterbacks who, have much different skill sets.
Aidan, that's a really good point. I think Burrow is probably one of the most slept-on players in all of fantasy this offseason. Nobody's talking about him, but he was ultra consistent last season for the first time. In year 2, coming off the ACL, he played really well, but he had huge pop weeks with Jamar Chase, like huge spike weeks. And then he also had some kind of dust ball weeks where it was like, okay, I know I can win this slate with Joe Burrow, but he might give me kind of a disappointing performance. Last year, he was much more consistent week in and week out as he really matured behind the offensive line, as he was more willing to take a check down to his running backs. I think we see Burrow kind of transform himself into potentially the MVP this year. And I think he could easily be one of those guys that scores 23, 24 fantasy points per game. It's just hard for him because he doesn't have the rushing upside that Hurts has and Allen has. And he doesn't have the rushing upside of the other two in this, and Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields. But I'd say behind Patrick Mahomes, he's probably going to throw the second most passing TDs in fantasy this season. So I think if everything broke right for him and he ran hot, he could easily finish as QB1, and that's why I have him in this tier. But until he's able to week in and week out put up 23, 24 fantasy points per game, I think I'm comfortable having him in this second tier here.
I could absolutely see a QB1 finish from him, but like this entire tier, I think all 3 of those guys, if they ended up as QB1, no one would really be all that surprised.
And we didn't even mention Lamar. We've talked about Lamar a lot on this podcast. New offensive coordinator, good receiving core. Lamar Jackson in the first half of the season last year, he had multiple QB1 finishes, multiple top 5 finishes. He was consistently finishing in the top 10 at fantasy. He has that rushing floor, and I think if he can evolve as a passer, he's going to continue to make that next step. So again, this is preaching to the choir. We're all in on Lamar this year. You can make an argument that Lamar should be in the first tier automatically, right? He never left it. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So that's why, again, it's this tier, the second tier is a good place to be right now in fantasy drafts without having to overpay for that top tier. But it feels like you're paying name brand for those first 3, but it's kind of worth it. I'd say the next tier I have is elite arms with limited rushing upside. So these are guys these are 2 guys that I have in this category, and I promise I didn't lump them in it because they look like each other. I had Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. And there's another guy that I contemplated putting in this tier because of previous history, but I ended up leaving him out in Deshaun Watson because he would have fallen in tier 2 or tier 3 normally. We just have to see him in a full year in the Cleveland offense before we bump him up. But I feel really confident about Herbert and Lawrence providing good floors. And then they could have the same season that Joe Burrow has, right? I think they have a limited ceiling because they don't have Jamar Chase. That's the short answer, right? But I have these 2 kind of in their own tier. What do you think about Herbert and Lawrence? Do you think they are their own separate tiers?
I think it's probably right to have them in their own tier because these are guys that traditionally, they just don't have the rushing upside, like you said, but they can do the damage through the air. Now, Lawrence is a different case because we are assuming and going off last year's tail end of the year performance, and we're more being predictive, but we've already seen it with Herbert. And he already has a 5,000-yard passing season under his belt where he threw for 38 touchdowns. And that's only 2 years ago at this point. But his value was super suppressed this year because of the offense that Joe Lombardi run.
One thing you mentioned to me too, I think it was about a week or two ago, is I think there's more rushing upside with Trevor too that we haven't seen. So I think first to your point, yeah, he went for just over 1,000 yards last year, probably needs to start getting closer to 4,500 or 5,000 yards. But Trevor Lawrence had a college season of nearly 600 rushing yards. So I think that's something he really hasn't used in the NFL. It's likely by design to protect him to some degree. But you've seen him wiggle a little bit, and he's a better athlete than I think people give him credit for, both him and Herbert. Herbert's already gone for, I think it was about 350 or 400 yards. Not last year.
Yeah, he had a 302 yards
so like
on the ground, like in that 2021 year where he threw for 5,000.
So I think both of these guys' value absolutely lies with their arms, but I wouldn't discredit them as guys who could potentially have sneaky rushing upside. Obviously, it's not going to be like some of your elite guys in those top tiers, but those guys are athletes and could give you some weeks of 30, 50, 60 yards, and it wouldn't surprise me all that much. So it'll be really interesting to see what these guys do. But I think in terms of putting them in their own tier, yeah, it's hard to really make a case for anyone else being with them or them being in one of the previous tiers. It makes a ton of sense.
Again, you could make arguments that Watson's in it. Again, I have Watson in the lower tier. I have some people that are really good at this have Watson ahead of Trevor Lawrence. We're just big Trevor guys. This is a very, very pro Trevor Lawrence podcast. So
And that's all right.
I think
that's all right. Yeah, you got to have your stances and stand by those.
The next tier I have here, I have it called the Airhead Mystery Flavor, because you're pretty sure it's like cherry or strawberry, but it's white and it kind of like messes with your head a little bit.
You think you know what it is.
You think you know what it is. It probably is that. So I have it the Airhead Mystery Flavor tier. In this tier, I have Deshaun Watson, Daniel Jones, and Dak Prescott. So, again, question marks here for these three specific quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson, is he good still? Because he used to be elite. We all know how well he did in fantasy when he was on the Houston Texans. Is that still in there? Have the Browns designed an offense around his skills? Daniel Jones, is he good? We don't really know, right? We know he rushed for a lot of yards last year. We know he had a good offensive coordinator. We know he did well considering the fact his wide receivers were garbage. Isaiah Hodgins has a family. Considering that his wide receivers were not highly drafted players or on NFL rosters for the most part. But now they have Darren Waller. I'm a little nervous about Saquon Barkley. How does that affect their overall offensive flow? So that's a question mark, right? And then Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott is somebody who has Mike McCarthy calling plays now. It's been a little hit or miss for Dak. He hasn't been rushing the ball as much over the past couple seasons. They're going to be relying heavily on Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. It just kind of seems like an offense that could break in different ways where they're the best offense in football, and I wouldn't be surprised, or they're pretty middling, and it's like a run-first offense. So they all have decent upside, safe floors, definitely higher ceilings than the next tier of players. But I'm curious to know your thoughts on these three guys. I know they're some of the easiest picks in best ball because they're just sitting right there. But I feel like they need to be in their own tier. Do you agree?
Deshaun is such a question mark. I think it's only fitting to have him here because his high upside case is like previous quarterback one in fantasy, somebody who can like be a game breaker. And then his really bad case is what we saw last year, like the Browns.
Washed.
So I think it's kind of a perfect, washed, exactly.
Just washed.
Kind of like a perfect spot here. But Deshaun also has the benefit of having a very good offense this year.
Yes.
Which is why I think he belongs in this tier, because even if he's washed, like that offense can move, and move with him. And it's not necessarily, it moved with Jacoby Brissett, right? Like, so touchdowns will be had in this offense and Deshaun will be a part of that. So I think he's properly ranked in this tier.
I agree with that. I think like the best point you made, Shaun, here is like these are really fun best ball guys, as because of how risky they are. Like it's really beneficial to pair these guys with someone from the tiers prior because it's a little bit easier to digest. You don't have to play them every week, but then you get those weeks where they absolutely go off and you're like, that was nice. Like that's what I anticipated. I'm not getting that on a weekly basis, but you're like, I knew that was in there. Daniel, like I knew you had that tucked in somewhere. So I'm excited about this tier. Like, I'll be drafting these guys. I think Daniel's probably the one that I'm most excited about, as I think we've seen the ceilings for both Deshaun and Dak, and I don't see them hitting them necessarily this year, whereas Daniel Jones threw for 3,200 yards last year. It feels like there's probably a 4,000-yard passer in there. I feel like there's a lot more meat on that bone. So Yeah, I'm interested about all of them, but Daniel Jones is probably the one that entices me the most here in terms of, being able to actually reach
And
heights that
we
they
are
haven't reached
high
yet.
on Daniel Jones on this podcast. I think some people would say having Daniel
Or
Jones in the
Daniel
same
Jones,
tier
yeah.
as Deshaun Watson is wild, but I'm here for it. The next tier that we have here, I have it, and this is tier 5. I have it called It Could Even Be a Boat. That's the name of this tier, and it's two guys, and I'd say these guys have some of the highest ceilings and lowest floors right now in fantasy football at the quarterback position, and it's Anthony Richardson and Tua. I don't know how to pronounce Tua's last name. How do you say Tua's last name?
Tungavailoa.
Tua Tungavailoa. I can't do it.
Tagovailoa.
Tungavailoa.
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 I threw an
Viola.
N in there.
Tungavailoa. I
Yeah.
don't know what. Tua. Tua T. Quarterback for the
Two
Dolphins.
and
Tua.
on.
Okay, so the reason why I have these two guys is pretty self-explanatory. Like Anthony Richardson's rushing ability is going to break the slate week in and week out. If he is even a semi-competent passer, like can, at least complete like 55% of his passes and is good in the red zone, he's going to be a top 12 play just because of his rushing ability alone. Like how many rushing touchdowns he's going to score is I think it's gonna be special. Like is the quote from Vince McMahon, but he could be just really bad. Like as a passer, he could have some like Navy midshipman passing lines where they throw like 8 pass. They could just go full Justin Fields. Like it could go full Justin Fields rookie season where it's like just really they're struggling. I think Shane Steichen is going to have good offensive infrastructure in place for Anthony Richardson, but I just say I can't put him in another tier with more established guys because he could go out and score 13 fantasy points per game for like a month. But he, back end of the season, he might be scoring 25, 26 as he starts to figure it out. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
The other guy's Tua, because when Tua played last year, he basically scored the same amount of points as Joe Burrow on a per game basis. He was one of the best and most efficient quarterbacks in all of football. He has two of the best weapons in football. His throws into coverage, I forget what it's called, but like tight window throws was 32nd in the NFL. It's just wide open windows in Mike McDaniel's offense. He has a good arm. He's smart. He could look like prime Drew Brees next season, or he may look like Sam Darnold, and it's just a complete nightmare. Or he may not even play, right? Like I think that's honestly the more the risk with Tua at this point. So you gotta have to have them separated in their own tier, and that's why I called it. It could even be a boat, right? Because it's like, look at these two guys. It's Tua and Richardson. It could be Jalen Hurts. It could be Joe Burrow, but you probably could just take those guys earlier, right? So if people are trying to wait on quarterback, these are some of the best high ceiling plays you can have. They're some of the riskiest picks right now in fantasy, in my opinion. What do you guys think about having two very different quarterbacks in the same tier?
I think in the weirdest way, like these two really do belong. Like you could probably make a case for Tua being higher and then just tossing Anthony Richardson, somewhere lower and getting rid of the tier altogether. But like the tier makes sense in terms of it is such a wide range of outcomes with these two guys.
I wish I had some of the stats ahead of in front of me right now, but like there was definitely an issue at the end of the season with, and maybe it's first year head coach Mike McDaniel, just trying to figure out how to be a head coach. But like there was definitely issues with the defenses that they faced towards the end of the year, and like
Brandon Staley,
their offense getting figured out a little bit.
Yep.
Like
the next tier that I have here is you'd bring them home to meet the parents. They're high floor, low ceiling plays. They might have some nice spike weeks. They don't really bring a lot to the table in terms of rushing upside. I think these guys could easily elevate themselves into that Herbert Lawrence tier. I wouldn't be surprised. But it's, your standard Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Jared Goff. These are some of the best picks at quarterback right now in fantasy, in my opinion, because you could take Tua and you could then take Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers. You could take Anthony Richardson and pair him with Jared Goff, right? And you just have that nice little consistent starter with some upside play if Richardson starts to figure it out. I don't think we need to spend too much time here, but if I had to pick out of these 5 guys, who's the one guy you think could jump up out of this group of Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Jared Goff?
Russ for me.
I'm going Geno. He finished QB5 last year, and his offense only got better. I don't know if he replicates, the same type of magic, but that team only got better. Their defense may not be good, too. So, like, they could just score a ton of points. My pick would be Geno personally.
I would not be shocked if Aaron Rodgers comes out and plays really well next season. I've been hard on him before, but I think he could play really well. The last tier we have here is the tier where people delude. It's the Arrested Development quote. People delude themselves into thinking that this will work. They convince themselves that it will work, even though I'm butchering the fucking quote, but it might work for us, right? It might work for us. It's Jordan Love, Sam Howell, Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, Desmond Ridder, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young. One of these guys probably will be good. Have fun figuring it out.
Sam Howell.
Yeah, I don't know. These guys can stay on waivers for me. Like these are bye week fills once you get into. Like, if I had to pick one here, it's whichever Niners QB ends up playing, just because the Niners QBs are typically pretty relevant. It's not like this massive ceiling, but I'd probably pick Purdy if I had to guess who makes it out of there. Ritter could be relevant. Yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty messy. Like, most of these guys will be on waivers for the majority of the year until you get into the middle weeks, or unless like we have a ton of QB injuries. Which
did you guys see the tweet I sent you right before we started the episode about Trey Lance?
No.
Up next on 60 Minutes, an interview with a best ball drafter who is still talking Trey Lance in the 18th round of drafts. Hear him explain why his third string quarterback is materially different selection from Mitch Trubisky and Marcus Mariota. The case for any of those guys is very hard to make. There's some long shots, but shit. If Trey Lance plays 15 games next year, I might break fantasy. So you never really know.
One of these guys will be good. I did that whole quarterback breakout study. These guys are projected to score 14 a game. One of them will score 18 a game. Usually it's quarterbacks that are younger in their first 2 or 3 seasons, maybe first year as an established starter. Could be a Jordan Love, Sam Howell, Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, Desmond Ridder, right? One of these guys will pop. I just realized I forgot Derek Carr. That might be his own tier. The guys I forgot about tier. I'll put him above this tier. It's Ryan Tannehill
right after
and Derek Carr.
He's after he's probably after
Goff. We'll put that in the guys.
Tannehill and Goff are in their own tier. It's just Derek Carr. That's the tier.
It's the I left him
I
off.
didn't even realize
I just
that's just
forgot
so
about
Derek Carr that we just like entire. Stafford too.
I'm
you can tell
bad
Stafford
vibes. Those reports about Stafford, I'm
Yeah.
bad vibes. I remember I came out and said, I think Stafford's going to play. And then like 3 articles came out, just hit pieces. So bad vibes. But right, that is the QB landscape. We really like guys in that second tier and that third tier. Looking at Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence. If you pay up for one of the premier guys, you're probably not going to regret it. Today's episode of the Regression to the Mean podcast is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Best ball on Underdog Fantasy is the best and easiest way to play fantasy football. Just draft your team and that's it. No waivers, trades, or weekly start-sit decisions. Underdog will automatically play your best players at each position every week. Sign up today with promo code RTM to receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. You can sign up for as little as $10 to start drafting today. Anyway, it is by far and away the best way to get prepped for fantasy redraft season, and you might win some money too. So it's kind of best of both worlds here. We've got like close to 50 best ball drafts done. I do like over 100 best ball drafts as the 3 of us, right? I think that at this point, there are guys that we feel that we want to draft no matter what, and we have guys that we are just not going to draft. Whether it be ADP, whether it be new offense, new scheme, whatever it may be, we have our fades and we have our flag plants. And I think this is a great opportunity, one, because we get to come out and, really pick our guys. These are the guys we're hitching our wagon to. And 2, we're going to be really wrong about half these, and it's going to make great content for later in the fantasy football season. Aidan hasn't done a milk was a bad choice yet. It's going to be special.
I'm excited.
So, kicking things off here, it is. It really is when you get to get in front of it yourself. Kicking things off here, Keegan, I wish we would have went with fade first because you're our biggest hater, and I feel like you operate at a different level when you're hating. But Keegan, kicking us off, who is your flag plant at quarterback? The guy you are drafting no matter what.
This is a guy right here at the quarterback position that I think can have his way with the NFL this year and is going to firmly establish himself as a top 5 quarterback and also be a top 5 fantasy quarterback this year and potential case to finish number 1. The quarterback I'm talking about here is Trevor Lawrence, right? I think at the beginning of the year, Trevor still struggled. First year in this offense, kind of like learning what he's doing. still a little bit in the NFL. But if you get to week 9, and that's about where the trend starts for Trevor Lawrence, where I think he really figured it out. Weeks 9 through 17, he was 7th in fantasy points per game, 9th in fantasy points per dropback, and 9th in total fantasy points. He also throws like a really catchable ball. He was like 2nd in a catchable throw rate last year, which I found to be a pretty good stat for Trevor because he is somebody who's kind of slinging the rock and throwing downfield. So if you take that even a little bit further, because he had an atrocious fantasy game in week 17 against Houston, but they also beat him 31-3. Like there was no need for Trevor to even play the rest of that game. If you look at weeks 9 through 16, 5th in fantasy points per game, 5th in fantasy points per dropback, and 5th in total fantasy points. So you already have a pretty legit sample for Trevor Lawrence to make a case that he can be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And one thing about Trevor Lawrence that Aidan brought up when we were going over our tiers is you don't really see him run the ball as much as you would like to, especially because we know he can do it in college. In college, in his 3 seasons, he averaged 314 yards a season in college. And in his sophomore year, he rushed for 563 yards, 99 attempts or something like that, averaged 5.5 yards a carry, and he had 9 touchdowns on the ground. Like, I know for a fact he's got it in him to add some rushing upside to his game. And last year, he only rushed for 195 yards, and he had about 2 TDs to go with it. You're telling me you can't get another 105 yards there, get up to 300 yards, and then add 3-4 more rushing touchdowns on top of his passing progression that I'm expecting him to go through? I think the case for Trevor here is pretty strong. And it's firm for me because I'm not paying the Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes price for a guy that I think can finish as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. We have him kind of in our 3rd tier here that, you can kind of get a better discount, build out a pretty robust team, and then add Trevor Lawrence to your lineup, and now you're really cooking.
You got
on top of it,
baby, you got a stew cooking.
Exactly. And on top of that, the best part is nothing's changed for him in the system. There's no coaching turnover. There's no change in game plan or play calling. Like, it's year 2 in this system. ETN fully healthy. Christian Kirk coming off a career year. Evan Ingram gets the deal that he deserves, and he looks like that tight end that we thought he was going to be in his rookie season. And, they also signed Calvin fucking Ridley, who last time we saw him play a full season was basically a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. So I think the case for Trevor here is pretty strong, and I'm planting a flag in sunshine right there.
Are you joining him? Are you? I was going to make a reference to like Iwo Jima, but where the Marines are planting the flag in the ground. Are you joining him on that group planting the flag, Aidan?
Yeah, it's me and Trevor holding the flag, and Aidan's on top, right? Aidan's
Yes,
up here.
yes. Are you joining him?
It's like the baseball mat memes, or like they're all putting like the hand on the bat. Yeah, no, I'm definitely in on this flag. We're a huge Trevor podcast here. I think his second half of the season, like, if that doesn't inspire you, especially with Calvin Ridley coming back, the continuation of the same scheme, I'm in on Trevor, especially at his price too. It's not like a bank-breaking pick in terms of ADP. So, no, the upside is endless with him. I think we're going to see a massive year. He'll probably throw for 4,500 plus and absolutely explode.
I'm all in. I love Trevor. I love this offense. I love Ridley. I love ETN. I love Doug Peterson. I might like just change my middle name to Duval. Like, I might just do it. I love this Jaguars offense. I'm all in for fantasy. I can't get hurt, right? But I think the sneaky thing about them is I don't think their defense is that good, and they play a really hard schedule. I think they're going to be throwing the ball so much. Their pass rate over expectation, their pace. I think it's just going to be an explosive offense. I'm quite excited for it. Aidan, before I share my flag plant, I'd love to hear yours. Who is the guy that you are drafting no matter what?
I love this guy personally. I think I've already talked about him multiple times. I'm going with the guy that's averaged over 4,600 yards throughout his first 3 seasons in the NFL and has the most passing yards in NFL history in his first 3 yards by a wide margin. That's right, we're talking about Justin Herbert. What's there not to like about this guy? Over his first 3 seasons in the NFL, he's thrown for over 14,000 yards.
That's absurd.
That is insane. That is more than 1,000 yards more than Andrew Luck, who absolutely lit up the NFL when he got here. So it's like, he's already done it. He's a year removed from being the QB2, which he threw for over 5,000 yards, which in my opinion is probably a more likely outcome than what happened last year, which by no means was bad. He finished as the QB11 with 4,700 yards and 25 touchdowns. You've got to take into account he's playing with broken ribs for most of the year, so a lot of his rushing ability like we already mentioned, was definitely zapped, which got taken away. You've also got to mention Keenan Allen missed 7 games, nearly half of the season, and Mike Williams was in and out of the lineup with 4 himself. Even when he was in there, was gimpy at best. So he was thrown to guys like Josh Palmer. Eckler obviously caught a ton of balls. Gerald Everett. Like, it's a miracle that he threw for 4,700 yards last year. And then you look at what they've done for him this offseason. They go and add a first-round wide receiver talent in Quentin Johnston, which is absolutely perfect for the scheme that I think Kellen Moore wants to run there. So you've got a healthy Keenan, you've got Quentin Johnston, you've got Mike Williams, who's hopefully healthy, you've got Gerald Everett, you've got Austin Eckler. Like, there's so many things that are lining up for what I think could easily be a QB1 season for Justin Herbert. And just a little side bit, I was looking at Underdog at his higher or lower contest. His total right now for passing yards is 4,385 yards. So this guy has averaged 4,600 yards over his first 3 seasons, and you can get his total right now at just under 4,400. So use promo code RTM, get yourself a nice little pick'em contest, and absolutely hammer higher on his passing yards. I made one earlier this week. I was like, I saw that one, and it inspired me to make a contest. I was like, I absolutely have to have this. So coincidentally enough, I know me and Keegan picked like the unique tier
with the two guys,
these 2 young guys with the rocket arms. But I love Justin Herbert. I think a big part of it comes down to price and just like what his upside is, and like it's such a good pick for me in fantasy.
He was QB2 2 years ago. He had like a 3%, what was it, like sub 3% touchdown percentage last season. That's going to regress to the mean. This guy is a 4 to 5% touchdown thrower. He ran cold last season. He also had close to 130 targets go to his running back. We love Austin Eckler, but that is not an ideal season for Justin Herbert, right? No. It's an ideal situation for Austin Eckler, but in terms of Justin Herbert's ceiling, you're not going to get there throwing 130-yard targets short of the sticks, right? And I'm here for it. I think it's hilarious that these 2 dudes we have in their own separate tier. And what's really funny is, remember I did that quarterback study, right? And I came up with this idea, or not came up with this idea, but I just found that QBs taken in round 6 or in the 5 to 8 range typically hit. Like they smash at their ADP. In the 6 to 8 range are Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, and Deshaun Watson. We talked a lot about them. So if you had to guess, my number 1 target, not just at quarterback, my number 1 target in all of fantasy football and my biggest flag plant in the 2023 season is Justin Fields. And the reason I'm taking Justin Fields is because what he was able to accomplish last year, it should be presented in the Smithsonian. They should put his jersey up in the rafters. Won 3 games, but developed as a passer. Like, that should go up in the rafters for Justin Fields, because in a make or break season for his development, Justin Fields was playing behind an offensive line that surrendered a pressure on nearly 50% of his dropbacks. And he was throwing the ball to Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, Dante Pettis, N'Keal Harry, Byron Pringle, Velus Jones Jr., Equinemius St. Brown, Trayvon Wesco, Nisimba Webster, and Emir Smith Marset. Yes, those are all real people. That was the receiving core in year 2 make or break development that Justin Fields was throwing to. To make things even more confusing, Fields didn't have a start in his career with more than 2 designed runs in a game until week 7 of 2022. Coincidentally, once the Bears started to use Justin Fields to his strengths, he became a terror on the ground, rushing for 861 yards and 7 touchdowns. For context, in Lamar Jackson's record-breaking year in 2019, he had 100 design runs called. Justin Fields was 64 yards from breaking the record with only 75 design runs called. From week 7 on, right? I think Keegan hit on this earlier. There was like a pivot point for Fields. From week 7 on, playing behind a terrible offensive line with a dreadful receiving core and an offense that still was behind the ball on his rushing ability, he finished with a higher EPA per play than Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, and Geno Smith. He had a higher completion percentage over expected than Tua, Brady, Rodgers, Goff, and Josh Allen. His second half splits across all metrics improved the second the coaching staff looked to get him involved in the run game and simplified the offense with RPOs. According to Fantasy Points data, in the first 6 games of the year, Justin Fields had an RPO percentage of 0.6%. His monster 10-game stretch, 6.3%. He elevated himself as a passer the minute they started to call RPOs. And guess what? In his final 10 games of the season during that stretch, 83% of his design rushes were called. He finished as QB4 on the season. He averaged the second most fantasy points per dropback. He rushed for 1,000 yards. He had 5 top 5 finishes in his last 10 starts of the year, and he finished outside of the top 10 only once. He broke the slate in back-to-back weeks with back-to-back 40 bombs. The addition of DJ Moore is going to improve the pass rate and efficiency of this offense. The additions to the offensive line should alleviate pressure and make it easier for Fields to develop as a passer. More RPOs and designed runs should lead to sustained success for Justin Fields. Justin Fields is primed for a monster season, gentlemen. That's my take. Are you guys buying Justin Fields?
I'm fucking fired up.
That gave me chills. Yeah.
Honestly.
That gave me chills. That made me, like, I almost had a tear. I had to hold back tears during the middle of that. Like, yeah, what we saw from Justin Fields last year with the cast around him was, like, downright a miracle. And then you look at, like, the improvement. He's going to be in year 2 of this scheme. Like, the roster around him is so much better. He's going to have, it's going to be special.
It's funny that we're all in this quarterback range where it's like this kind of round 6, round 5 quarterback. You get to build out a complete roster and take a massive swing with upside. So I think that's great. Yep. Transitioning here to our fades. And these are guys we're not wanting to draft. We look through our underdog, who we're drafting, who we're not drafting, and it's just guys we're not clicking the draft button on for some reason or another. Keegan is our resident chief hater. Why don't you kick things off?
That feels wrong,
Keegan.
That feels wrong to have that title, Shaun.
Accept it. Let the hate consume you.
It's it's definitely accurate.
I mean, gosh, okay, fine. Yeah, I'll be the resident hater here. The quarterback today that I brought here in front of you to hate on was at one point the QB number 2 behind only Lamar Jackson in 2019. And in 2021, he was again a top 5 quarterback at the fantasy position. This is a guy who, when healthy, routinely throws for over 4,400 yards. The quarterback today that I'm sadly brought to talk to you about fading is Dak Prescott. And I didn't really want to do this, but I think the case for Dak is tough to make this year. Dak Prescott is a quarterback that I think we see, because he's done it before, has the potential for a top 5 QB finish, especially in fantasy. Currently, he floats around QB9, QB10, and half PPR ADP, depending on what site you're looking at. He's let out the QB12 and underdog rankings. But the case against Dak kind of starts with his rushing ability. So prior to 2020, Dak was a really good fantasy quarterback. Like I said, I mean, he's been the number 2 fantasy quarterback before. He's been a top 5 quarterback before. But he also had a very reliable rushing floor. 2016 to 2018, he basically had 6 rushing touchdowns every year for 3 straight years. And in 2019, he had another 3 to go with it, and he was averaging about 305 rushing yards per game throughout those 4 years. So that's the kind of floor I was talking about that Trevor needs to get to, or Herbert would need to, like, vault themselves into the next tier. And it's why Dak was able to do that. And it helped raise his fantasy floor, as all Konami quarterbacks do. Like, they had the higher floor because of it. But after that 2020 injury, where he'd really mess up his ankle, the rushing yard the next couple seasons were his lowest marks for rushing yards per game and just rushing touchdowns in general. I mean, he went from 6 touchdowns a year to back-to-back years with 3. 2020 started off really hot, broke his foot, and then 2021 and 2022, he only had 1 rushing touchdown, less than 180 yards in both of those seasons. But without the safety of that rushing game, his top 5 quarterback potential is super limited to me. I love the offense around him. I think some of his weapons are my favorite best ball targets. Michael Gallup's like my most exposed player in best ball, but again, that's best ball. We're talking spike weeks. If I'm going to take a bet on a quarterback in kind of like these later 8-9 rounds that I think has some massive upside, I'd rather do a Geno. You know, I'd probably rather just go with a Jared Goff or a Kirk Cousins even this year, because I know what their offense is going to be, and I know the upside for high volume passing, and they're going to play at a much better pace than the Cowboys are this year. And I'm just going to have to be off Dak this year in redraft. Kind of makes me sad.
You kind of nailed it. If they throw the ball less, he either has to be ultra efficient and have like an Aaron Rodgers type touchdown season, right, where he throws like 40 tutties, or he's just going to be like Kirk Cousins, which is kind of crazy to think that we've gotten to this point where Dak and Kirk are probably closer together than they are apart. And, Kirk's going at 111, and honestly, Dak is settling into that range. So maybe Dak is in that tier. Maybe Dak isn't in the high upside tier without this rushing. It's kind of crazy to think he's going around the same time that Geno and Kirk and Rodgers are going. He might just be in that tier. I kind of lump him ahead because I think he's better, but that just might be the point in his career he is, especially if they don't have that play volume that they've had with Kellen Moore.
And I think another thing too is Dak, I saw that quote a couple of days ago. It's like, I won't have more than 10 interceptions this year, but it's like, that's not the Dak that I want. To assume that Dak is like an interception prone quarterback, I think is wrong. I mean, I don't think you're like properly watching the game. I want Dak to push the ball down the field. Like, it's what makes him such a good quarterback sometimes. Like, he is willing to put stuff into tight windows. He's willing to take a risk. And that's what elevates you. Like, these big play throws, right, is what elevates you in the fantasy space. It's like, if he's going to play this conservative game, maybe do some play action stuff, and that's where the big plays come from, but he's not going to be like taking risk and taking deep shots. Can we really see a top 5 upside case for his fantasy outlook this year? I just don't see it happening. I feel like it's going to be a much more controlled offense. And there's nothing wrong with drafting him, I guess, where you're at, but it's like, why not just go get Kirk? They're going to throw the ball probably more than anybody this year. Seattle is going to try and replicate what they did last year. And now they have a third wide receiver, and they can bump up to playing more 3 wide receiver sets. Like, there's better options out there that are going to give you the same thing and might even be cheaper.
I'm not like a full fade on Dak, but I think like the best way to put that I think like you hammered home a couple times is like there's just better options at that range. They're going to pass less. He doesn't run as much anymore. And it just feels like his ceiling is not what it used to be in years prior. And I know this isn't something we touched on, it's maybe not the most relevant thing, but like he has missed some time now. He has missed significant time in 2 of the last 3 seasons after playing every game in his first 3 years. Some of those are bad luck. Some of could be the way he plays, but like at some point, like you have to factor that in and kind of bake that into your kind of like risk analysis there too. And be like, okay, like, this guy is starting to get more banged up. It just feels like a lot of the things that like used to be a lot higher on with Dak are trending in the wrong direction, sadly. So, yeah, I'm probably fading him.
Laugh at me all you want. My fade at quarterback in 2023 is Josh Allen, the guy who has led the position in points for the past 3 seasons, who has finished as quarterback 1, 1, and 3 over the last 3 seasons. Josh Allen has been one of the safest bets in all of fantasy, was a round 6 breakout in 2020, and has cashed at ADP back-to-back seasons. Nothing against Josh Allen, nothing against his Bills offense. I just think that he is going to run the ball less. And because they've brought in additional thumper running backs, guys that are better in the goal line, guys that could eat into his 7 rushing touchdowns or more per season, I think you're going to see his rushing production dip in 2023. Rushing production has accounted for 23% of all of his fantasy points over the last 3 seasons. Even if his rushing percentages dip by like 8 to 10%, he's still going to be a top 5, top 6 play. Next question. He is not going to be a bad pick in fantasy. This has everything to do with opportunity cost. And if he falls out of the top 3 or 4, you essentially have wasted a draft pick that could have been a premium wide receiver or running back because you took Allen in the 2nd or 3rd round. And I'd rather just pick Mahomes or Hurts if I were going to make that decision because of the current offenses they play in. And I honestly think either Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, or even Justin Fields is going to jump into this top 3 at the end of the season. And I just feel like I don't love the weapons in this passing game. I think the Bills aren't as good when they go full Josh Allen hero ball mode, right? I think, honestly, they could do a little bit better if they just ran the ball a little bit more, simplified the offense a bit. He's proven that he can go hero ball. He's proven he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But I feel like the Bills need to get the 1 seed. Obviously, Josh Allen will be a big part of it, but keeping him healthy, limiting his rushing production, utilizing him in certain spots, I think will be really critical. I'm fading probably one of the best players in all of football, and it's not even that. It's just I don't draft him. So I have to be honest here. I don't draft a ton of Allen unless I have Diggs or I'm trying to build an Allen stack in best ball, but I don't think I'll be finding myself drafting Josh Allen in fantasy drafts this summer. Pretty bold, I know, but that's just where I'm at on Allen.
Yeah, I don't know if I can join you on this one. We've been kind of consensus so far. I know you guys keep saying that you think he's going to rush less. I personally don't see that dipping very much. If that does happen, like, hats off. I don't think Josh Allen wants to do that. And he's got the ball in his hands. A lot of times, like, he's going to be making a lot of these decisions. He has the power to switch the plays. So, in my opinion, I'm still in on Josh Allen. He should still finish as a top 3 QB, and I could warrant the cost. Obviously, yeah, it depends exactly where I am at the board. Especially like if he slides to me, absolutely. I'm not going to be reaching for Josh Allen, but I don't think I'm going fade to the same degree you are. What do you think, Keegan?
It depends on what we're talking. I think if I can get him in a redraft at the right price, I'll do it. But I agree that like his best ball price is too much for me right now. Building out a Diggs Allen stack is not something I've done a lot of. No, I have drafted some Diggs, but the Allen thing is so pricey for me. I mean, you got to basically do a like Diggs at 9 and like a Josh Allen at the wrap pick right after that, which is like what, pick 15, you know? So it's a little bit tricky for me to like pull off, but I don't really want to fade him in redraft. I mean, if Josh Allen's staring, if I'm at like the end of the 3rd round wrap and I've got 2 solid players and I'm at the 3rd round wrap and it's 3rd in my 4th pick and I'm looking at Josh Allen, I'm probably pulling the trigger, you know. But
the redraft thing is hard. I'm with you in best ball. Like 100%. Redraft is going to be tough though. Redraft's going to be really tough.
Bring us home. Who are you fading?
This is someone I've talked about a bit. Immense upside. The biggest issue I have with him is his abilities as a passer, and they're pretty glaring. So this is a rookie. This is Anthony Richardson, and it's just I think he's very limited and raw as a passer, which really concerns me. You look at his completion percentage in college; it actually dipped from his 2nd to 3rd year. Granted, the sample is much bigger. In 2021, he was a 59% passer on just under 70 passes, so small sample versus 53.8 with just over 325. So that's tough. Like, you want to see quarterbacks in college absolutely light it up. You want to be, 60%, ideally, like a polished, more accurate passer coming out of college. And that's a huge concern for me. The second of it being is I think the Colts are going to be a really run-heavy offense, especially early in the year. I don't think Shane Steichen is going to throw him in with the Sharks and try to have Anthony Richardson win them football games. I think they're going to try to put him in very favorable downs and distance, lots of play action, RPOs, and things to really ease him into the NFL. And he's got Jonathan Taylor there. I think Jonathan Taylor could absolutely help with that. I'm personally banking on a nice bounce-back year from JT. So I see a really run-heavy attack, as we've already noted in the previous episode. The Eagles were 2nd in the NFL in rushing, so it's going to be a really run-heavy offense. And lastly is, again, this is something I already touched on. It just rookie QBs typically don't succeed in fantasy. We've seen 3 of them in the top 10 since 2013, and unless he's running for probably north of 600, 700, 800 yards with his passing ability, I see it very hard for him to break that. So again, I think Steichen did an amazing job with Hurts last year, but I think this is still such a raw player, very young, very raw in terms of his passing. So pretty much everything would have to go right, in my opinion, for him to be a top 10 fantasy asset. Given his price, that's okay. This is the cheapest out of the 3 of these QBs we've mentioned. He's probably right around QB 15 when it's all said and done once you get to your drafts this summer. So it's not nearly as risky as some of the other ones, but it's just someone that I'm really having a hard time stomaching in terms of the risk versus reward. I'd rather go with someone else in that range, like kind of going back to the same guys. Like, I'd rather have Geno. Like, just give me Geno or give me Goff. Like, I kind of know what I'm getting with those guys, and I feel a lot safer with those picks.
Yeah, I think playing devil's advocate, his completion percentage was terrible because they just ran like a deep pass offense with guys who couldn't get open. But again, he struggled with accuracy. He struggled with hitting checkdowns. Like, I won't make too many excuses. I think I love Anthony Richardson, and I think he could be a potentially like a guy that could help you win a championship in the playoffs as he figures it out. He's gonna have to score like 10 plus rushing touchdowns to like be a top 12 play. Yep. I think it's a lot to expect a 21-year-old to be really good right away. Like you're not
He's so
Justin
young.
Herbert. He's 23. Like
Yeah, I completely
he'd be the
agree.
youngest
He's so
quarterback to
young,
break
dude.
out. He's 21 years old. He's one of the youngest players in the NFL. So it's a lot to expect for Anthony Richardson. So I, as one of his biggest fans, I get where you're coming from. I can't argue against it too much.
I'm super excited to watch him. Don't get me wrong. Like I'll absolutely be cheering. I'll be watching, but like I don't think I'm ready to roster
Keeper.
him unless I'm in a dynasty
He's a
league.
sneaky
Obviously,
keeper guy, but
Yeah,
he'll probably
or
be a
keeper.
6th-round pick next year anyway.
yeah.
If he doesn't get drafted, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like the thing is, his upside is so high. Like he'll probably get drafted and then dropped. Like he's a guy that you like save your fab, like your free agent budget for.
Oh, for
and
sure.
Just like blow your load on him. When he gets hot, it's gonna be fun.
What? What did you just say?
Dude, think about Fields last year. Fields
No,
didn't
you
get
just
drafted
said
last year.
You said you'd blow your load on him when it gets hot.
Your load, dude. When he gets hot, your load on your fab. Yeah, I said it. I'm gonna blow my load everywhere when Anthony Richardson catches
On
fire.
him. It's what you just said.
Oh, that's not.
You said I'm gonna blow my load on
I think
him.
he did say on it.
This is all to distract from the fact that Aidan was banging Brees Hall.
Oh,
No,
you guys have been sus.
You went on.
Dude,
This is a family-friendly
Oh,
program. What you want to do with the comfort of your homes,
whatever.
Keegan? I don't blame you. Oh my goodness, I think that's where we end this one. Yeah,
That feels like a
Keegan,
good way to
before we
wrap
get
this
out of
one
here, you got anything to say to listeners?
I love sparkling water. Just can't stop drinking these things, baby.
He loves
That's it
sparkling
for me.
water.
That's
Until
it. I
next
love
time,
lamb.
everybody. I love Scott Hansen.
Exactly.